Hello everyone. I thought I wanted to share a little bit of the emerging thinking that connects to our conversation here and that also connects to the most recent work I have been doing. And a little bit of my own background. I was born and raised in Germany, and one of my formative experiences in fact was to see the collapse of the Berlin Wall. And be part, actually, I grew up as part of the environmental and then the peace movement in the late 70s, early 80s, and back then there was a lot of grassroots connection. There was a felt sense of connections across countries, across institutions, like a natural feeling of a different future possibility that we all felt and still feel is possible, yet completely contrasted by current reality. And yet, no one was really believing in the collapse of the Berlin Wall. Weeks before the collapse, we actually were in Eastern Berlin and talking with grassroots activists there. And really no one saw it exactly coming on that time, or very few people. This major structure coming down in such a short period has been a very formative experience for me, where I realized that all these voices, what so-called is built for centuries or eternities, suddenly there's there's a disruptive change and all these laws no longer apply. And I think we are in exactly the same situation now. But this time it's concerning capitalism and the evolution and transformation of capitalism. And I would like to go back to Bob's remark of this morning, where he said that we are a movement. And in fact, we are not only a movement now, our movement has been in the making for at least at least in my own experience, the last 4 decades. And what we have seen in the past is fragmentation. We have the environmental movement and then social issue movements. We have consciousness movements, but it really was not connected as a whole. And some of that we have also seen around the new economics, right? So there are the people who it's all about currency and money, and it's all about ownership, or it's all about conscious consuming. And yes, we know all of these are important pieces of the bigger picture. So part of movement creation really is that we become more familiar with connecting the dots and seeing what we do as part of a larger whole. So I want to contribute to that conversation 3 or 4 points. And the first one is an evolutionary framework of the current transformation that we are a part of, which is basically the current transformation of capitalism. And if you look at an evolutionary framework of the modern economy, what is a modern economy? It's division of labor. It's where we have high productivity through division of labor. So how do we coordinate the whole? How do we put the pieces back together? And there has been one answer, and that's called through regulation and hierarchy. And that we call it in Europe mercantilism, or in the 20th century we called it socialism in Eastern Europe. But it's basically the state, one central agency in part of connecting the dots, putting the whole together. The second answer to the coordination problem, and that's economy 2.0, is markets. And that's basically markets and competition, and we know all around that, and this thought schools around that. Huge progress, huge growth, and huge negative externalities, which then lead to the third stage, which is basically around organized interest groups that emerge in order to mitigate and deal with the negative externalities, and that have led to a whole generation of innovations in institutions around Federal Reserve, around Social Security, around environmental standards. And that has worked throughout the 20th century in some parts of the OECD world quite well, but we see it fail in the 21st century dealing with global externalities. And that was nowhere more clear than the collapse of the talks in Copenhagen and Wall Street preventing Washington doing effective banking regulation. So we see a system here that has worked quite well for parts of the world in the 20th century, but now it hits the wall, and we have a conversation that says, well, is it this one, or is it kind of what we had before? While in reality, we need to move forward, and we need a new model, kind of a new coordination mechanism that doesn't revolve around special interest and organized interest groups, but that revolves around seeing and acting from the whole. That revolves around the systemic capacity of key actors to pull together around commons, rather than pursuing abstract kind of group interests that are in conflict with each other on a macro level, which is kind of the main 3.0 way of organizing. So that's the framework. And so what I find exciting about the current moment, that we are at the birth of a new coordination mechanism. We know that the three old responses, which is more government, more market, or more stakeholder dialogue, will not produce the responses that we need to this century's challenges. But what we need is a new systemic, collective innovation capacity that innovates the system at the scale of the whole and not just in small pockets of the system. The question, and that's my second slide, is, okay, if that's kind of a framework where basically we have to rethink and reinvent all the key dimensions of the economy from an consciousness. So what I basically said so far is evolution of the economy is the evolution of consciousness. And it means that we move from an ego, and economic laws are transformed as a function of consciousness. The economy that we have is based on ecosystem awareness and given preferences. But the economy, that's the economics and the economy that we have. But the economy and the economics that we needs to revolve around ecosystem awareness, around an awareness of the whole system that we are a part of. And I think what it means for the economy is that we need to, and was Michelle's point in the last plenary, we need to transform, remember her last point, what matters most is relationships. So all economic value creation is about relationships. And what we need to transform is the way we communicate and relate with one another. And with all the economic actors. And what we have today is basically one-way relationship, which is manipulation. It's called bribery, it's called commercials, right? The way the economy, the corporations relate to the consumers is through commercials, which is one-way downloading and kind of manipulating. It's not a two-way conversation. What we also have is the two-way interactive model of the market and democracy. And more recently, kind of responding to all the big challenges that we have like three-way. We have a move from economy as markets to economy as conversations, multi-stakeholder conversations. Conversations as the place of value creation. But what I believe what we really need is something else, which is economy as co-creation. Economy as the systemic capacity to connect with each other and oneself in a transformative way. And that's really the challenge we have locally, we have regionally, and also we have globally. And that could renew the economy kind of from these hubs of kind of transformative, co-creative relationships. So how do you build that capacity? In my experience, and that really has been my main focus area practically in the last 10 years, and in my experience, it is a movement that is going through the stages of co-initiation, identifying the shared intention in a stakeholder group, what it is that you want to create together, co-sensing, walking in each other's shoes, seeing the system from the edges, seeing the system from the most marginalized participants in a system. Then co-inspiration, kind of connecting to your deeper sources of knowing, kind of using deep reflection, contemplative practices, moments of stillness to really connect with who we are and who we want to be going forward and what future we want to create. And then exploring the new through experimentation, through rapid cycle prototyping, rather than lengthy planning processes, and then institutionalizing and scaling the new. And what we learned is, in kind of taking, in other words, the journey to build this collective capacity is a journey from ecosystem awareness to ecosystem awareness. And what we learned is, to be successful in this journey, to help a group to go through these stages, that you not only need to take people to the edges of the system, kind of seeing the system from the most marginalized, but you also need to go to the edges of your own self. You also need to engage in some kind of new type of leadership work. And kind of that's kind of my last point here. It's a new leadership point, new leadership work that basically says that in order to go through this journey of kind of innovation and renewal here, as an individual and as a community, we need to do a new type of inner leadership work. And the essence of that new type of inner leadership work is this. It is kind of to tune these three instruments: the open mind, which is the capacity to suspend habits of judgment; the open heart, which is the capacity to see a situation through the views of other stakeholders; and the open will, which is the capacity to let go and to let come. To let go of our old self, to let come of our emerging or authentic self. And doing that really helps us to connect kind of to our deeper sources of knowing and of self. And what is striking and what is also moving me in doing this work is that even if you do that in the most unlikely places, it is kind of touching on a deeper sense of humanity. So that we kind of find a common ground where kind of on a deeper level of humanity we connect and begin to able to think with each other that goes beyond the systemic or the institutionalized conflicts of interest that we all have. And that the leadership work kind of that we all do as we move kind of groups through these kind of journeys has a lot to do and has essentially to do with dealing with these three sources of resistance: the voice of judgment, which shuts down the open mind; the voice of cynicism, which shuts down the capacity to empathize; and the voice of fear, kind of which is shutting down our capacity to let go and to put our foot into the space of the unknown.
What's the second voice?
Voice of cynicism. It's basically, you know, when you empathize, it's risk-taking. You show your own, you make yourself vulnerable because you open up. So an easy way is to distance yourself. So with cynicism, I mean all moves of distancing yourself from the situation. So you're no longer in denial of what's going on, but you say, well, I can't do anything. It's like, it doesn't make a difference. So it's what I do. It's going to hell anyway. So you're more in denial of your own role. You're not in denial of the situation. So movement, so how do we create movements? In my view, kind of movement is not just focusing on the external challenges, kind of scaring people, which we kind of as environmental movement and so on have done for too many years. It is also not only to connecting with others, like-minded people who kind of feel the same impulse, but it is essentially to connect with our emerging self, to connect with our sense of the future, kind of our sense of what we feel is possible as individuals, but also as communities, and kind of bringing these three aspects together, I think, is kind of is the source from where we can build kind of the collective capacity to act. With that, I would like to hand it over to Alicia to share a little bit into the from the work
Thank you, Otto. So my name is Alicia Gravitz, and the work I do is with Green America. We're a new economy organization that works on some of the practical implementation of movement building and connecting with families and businesses to create a green economy. Whether you call it green economy or sustainable economy or new economy, I think what is the vision that brings all of those things together is that it encompasses both social and economic justice along with community and environmental health. So what the part that I'm doing, one of the things about collaborative leadership is always giving the bus tour. So we started off connecting with each other a little bit, and Otto sharing a brief piece of his work about the theory. And I'm going to jump a little bit into practice. My organization coordinates networks of networks. We create a lot of open collaboration pathways, both online, and we do something called Green Festival that brings literally hundreds of organizations together. We got an award in Seattle for, in a community that's very activist, we got a special award in Seattle for bringing people into the room that had never been in the room before. So I'm just going to talk a little bit from the front lines of building collaborative leadership. I'm going to run through some principles and strategies and give a few quick examples and some resources. And the idea here is just pick up one new idea, or maybe afterwards you can tell me one new idea that I can add to this. And don't worry about taking notes or absorbing it all. Just go with what resonates. So the place I want to start off with is collaborative leadership helps people identify their roles. And I've observed over many years in the trenches, you can see with the gray hair, of people kind of arguing about what's the right strategy, and this one's better than that one. And in fact, in order to shift a system, we need many strategies and people bringing all their best gifts to the table. And sometimes understanding the different roles that people are playing and how to best collaborate is very important. So I really want to thank the work of Berkana, and Deborah Fries is here, by the way, to really talk about when you transform a system, basically what you are doing, and now I'm going to put it into new economy terms, is that you've got to get rid of what's damaging and suffering. So you want to hospice the old destructive system and you want to close it down. So if that's your best gift, if marching into the boardroom or doing Occupy, if that's what you're good at, my God, we need you, and go for it. The second major transformative strategy is to creating and scaling the new systems. So if you're creating sustainable food systems, if you're creating new community energy systems, that's what the work that you're doing is. I cannot tell you how many times I have been in a room of people who are of like vision and like mind, who have a knockdown, drag-out fight about what you got to do. We got to do both. We also need to build the lifelines from the old to the new, especially as we're starting to get scale on the new economy. We've got to make sure that people in the old economy have a lifeline over, or that we find ways to thank them for their service. For example, no, I mean seriously. For example, I'm a climate geek, and if we want to lay down coal, there's been amazing things happening in laying down coal. There are 141 permits pulled from 150 plants that were proposed up to 5 years ago. There are now only 17,000 people left in the coal industry. There were 17,000 people alone in Pennsylvania just 10 years ago. Most of them are over 50 or over 55, and they would love to retire. Why not thank them for their service, make sure they have a pension, and have attention to their health, and let's lay that industry down. So that's what I mean by building lifelines. Other people need the new green jobs. Let's build those lifelines. The fourth thing we need is we need people to tell the new stories. Day after day after day, you hear from the conventional media that you don't have, there's no alternative, we got to do it this way, and yet we've got this vibrant new economy growing around us. My climate teams track solar in particular. We were looking at how much solar, what curve you would have to be on to have 50% of our global energy coming from solar by 2050. We are so far ahead of the curve, we could be there by 2042. You won't see that in any headline. So we need people to tell the new stories. And we need people to nurture consciousness change, like Otto was just talking about, and collaborative leadership. If you are playing any one of those roles, all of the other ones doing the other roles are your allies. Encourage them, support them, be clear about what roles you're playing, and share each other on. So I'm going to go through what I think are the key principles for collaborative leadership. The first one is to work from that sense of where the transformational strategies are. So we just talked about that a little bit. The second is to embrace a biodiversity of strategies, issues, and approaches. I think everyone who works in these movements knows that all of these issues are integrated. So whether you're working on water or energy or racism or poverty, we can all work together towards a vision of a new economy. We really need to embrace both and. None of this business about you have to focus on one thing. We have to figure out strategies that encompass all of them. And we need to engage people on bringing their gifts to the table. And we need to go with Tama. There are many alternatives. As opposed to Tina, there is no alternative. We have to get people thinking about all the different ways there are to get there. And we need to align purpose and find areas of agreement, as well as establish principles and remind people often. In my organization, we always run all meetings, and we have a list of our own principles that we've all agreed to that we remind ourselves ahead of time, just so that we stick with them. And it's just an amazing thing. It only takes a few minutes, but the intentionality helps ground everybody. By the way, if you hear people saying, some of the warning signals are when people say there is no alternative, we have to do it this way. Right away, you know that it's not a co-creative enough conversation. Plan for wild success. So many organizations feel that they're so up against things, they don't even have a definition for wild success. So one of the things to check in with yourself as you leave this conference is, what's your definition for wild success and what are you doing to get it? We need a lot of wild success. Think big, consider scale. It is absolutely true. It takes as much effort to get 50 people into a church basement as it does to get 500 people into a great conference like this, as it does to get 5,000 people into a festival over the weekend. So think big. Encourage the small but big at every stage. So what I mean by that is, as you're working with people, find out over and over and over again what are the steps that they can take and make it happen. Work with them to make it happen. Cheerlead for everything that happens. People love, I mean, I have to say, sometimes I kind of like, well, you know, I'm from Minnesota, just thank me and I'll get on with it. But when I work with leaders who like notice things and thank you and cheer you when you walk in the room and send out an email saying, hey, we're almost there, what a difference it makes. It totally changes the energy. So recognize everyone for what they do and celebrate often. So a couple of small but bigs, like in my office, we moved our copier. Made a huge difference in people's productivity, you know, totally, you know, sometimes you just don't need the big things. We have a Wednesday afternoon yoga class. What a difference it makes. Not a big thing, but just, you know, those kinds of things. I want to give a quick external example, a case of two cities as small but big. Silver Spring, Maryland in the late 60s, early 70s, like so many inner urban areas, was starting to exhibit decay, all the things that come with it, and they decided that the way forward was to find a really big anchor to come into their downtown area and create the space that brings in other people. In the 70s, they failed to find a big savior. In the 80s, they failed to find a big savior. In the 90s, they failed to find a big savior. And they suffered all the increasing crime, economic losses, and fewer resources that happened. Now, if you live in the DC area, you know they finally succeeded in the 2000s. And in the spirit of there are many alternatives, their strategy finally worked after 30 years. They brought in Discover and a couple others, and they're now enjoying a revitalization. But it took them 30 years. A similar town that was similarly situated, Bethesda, which now everybody thinks of as very upscale, but was in the same condition as Silver Spring those 30 years ago. They said, well, we have no money, but what are we going to do? So they went around and they asked their small businesses, what would you need to thrive? And the small businesses told them what they would need to thrive. And oh, by the way, small businesses, what do you need to thrive? And we have no money to help you, but what do you need? So they found all these small but big things that they could do, like providing free parking and cleaning up the bike paths, that they, in a lot of cases, did collectively and not just from the city coffers. And it created an immediate renaissance in the small business environment that started immediately and led to the amazing success that Bethesda has as a great place to live immediately. They didn't have to wait 30 years. So small but big, pay attention to them, take those steps. Dialogues, I know you guys all know this, dialogues are essential for creating real and lasting change. For those of you who follow Otto's work, you know the amazing scenario work that happens in South Africa, just getting people to talk about what does our future look like if we take action or if we don't take action. Those of you who if you don't know the story of the Chattanooga in Tennessee, they also did something very similar, just getting groups of people together in the places where they already were, in their recycling groups, in their churches, in their schools, in the Department of Waste Removal, to find out what would a better Chattanooga look like. That was in the 70s. They did it 3 or 4 times. Each time they did it, they implemented the small but big things 10 years ahead of what they needed. And now Chattanooga is considered one of the, consistently gets into one of the top places to live in the country. Keep finding areas of agreement. And by the way, especially when you're thinking of the biodiversity of strategy, one of the things you don't need to do is to get everybody to sign off on the specifics of the vision. A broad vision about where are we steering towards, that's enough. When you get into the specifics, that's where you can get into disagreements. But when you have the big, broad vision that people can head towards in their own way, that's what really makes everything sing. Number 6, very important, is to design for different kinds of thinking styles. Just like there's more than one way to do any kind of a process, you've got to be able to design for people that like to go from big to small, other people like to go from the details to the big picture. All of the things. How many people here know about Myers-Briggs? The people in this room, I could bet, probably fit into one of those categories in Myers-Briggs that's about 3% of the population, right? And we need to understand that the people that we need to engage may have other kinds of thinking styles. I have had some extraordinary experiences around diversity where people think it's around gender issues, around race issues, and where I have seen people paying attention to thinking styles removes a lot of the charge around that, because we have different thinking styles. I had an extraordinary opportunity to be in a group where we were 50 people with the same thinking style. We had to test before we all got into this group. That particular group has hung together for 10 years. 2 times a year, it's about solar, advancing the solar industry. We get together 3 days a time, 2 times a year, because we all think alike. Nobody ever triggers anyone, even though there's a lot of people who would otherwise be considered having big egos. You get mixed thinking styles into the room and you trigger each other. You need that diversity if you're going to do something besides sit around and talk. Because, for example, my thinking style was say, oh, let's build a bridge over there. And the safety thinkers are going to go, now wait a second, before you build that bridge, put on the safety handrails. And before I thought about thinking styles, I would have gone, oh my goodness, they're resisting. No, they're not. They're giving their gift. And if you understand what people's thinking styles are, you can help everyone get together and work better together. And if you make them transparent, you can get people to appreciate each other so they don't trigger each other, so that they know what roles they're playing. There are lots of thinking style exercises out there. It doesn't, in my opinion, it doesn't matter which one you do with a group. It's that you do it and that you're intentional about it, and you help people understand what gifts, that they're each bringing different gifts to the table, and to appreciate them. And it can really change how a group works together. Finally, and this one should have been first, but I'm going to put it last so maybe you'll remember, is that you've got to take care of yourself. You've heard this before. I'm not saying anything you don't know, but seriously, if you're going to be in it for the long haul, you've got to pace yourself. You've got to get out of debt. You've got to attend to your health. Get lots and lots of process skills. I've seen so many things break down, not because of intent, not because of lack of agreement on vision, not because of disagreements about what had to get done, but simply because people didn't have enough of the facilitative process skills to get over the bumps in the road. So get those skills, get the people around you to get those skills. It's extraordinarily important. As Otto said, do your own leadership practice around meditation or yoga or whatever it is to ground yourself and to be able to always be in that place of love with others, even when the bumps in the road happens. I know you know all of this, and I know the person who finally shoved me into a good yoga practice. She said to me, Alisa, you must do this. And I said, I got no time for this. I'm working 24/7. I got no time for this. And she said, I promise you, I promise you, if you get a good meditation or yoga practice, you will be able to be much more productive in the time you have. And she was so right. How many people have had that experience? So I'm preaching to half the choir. The other half the choir, please join us. It makes it amazing. So just here's the quick recap. My guess is you guys know it all. Hopefully having it on one page is of use. And again, you can get the slides. I want to give you 2 must-reads if you haven't already have these 2 in your library. Presence, the Human Purpose, and the Field of the Future. Otto is one of the co-authors. It is just, I think it's extraordinarily important. And if you are one of those people that are working in changing the old systems, I would encourage you to hand this book to corporate executives and people who are on the other side of the table. It can do amazing things for opening people's minds and hearts. And then just the very practical side, the Consensus Pocket Guide, How to Achieve High Commitment Decisions, is an extraordinary a font of wisdom in a very small volume. I don't know if it's in this big bookstore, but you can certainly get it online. It's great. Also, please join with us. Green America does the content side of things. So if there are resources that your groups need, our job is to provide those resources for folks. So, you know, these are just some examples. In your packet, the National Green pages with a little coupon of being a free member. If you're not a member, please join with us. Like I said, we are into networking and getting the information out there. So my concluding thought is for you in terms of developing your own practice, if you have not done this already, it's just the most amazing thing, is to create your own circles of support. How many people here have their own mutual board of directors? So this is something, you find 3 or 4 or 5 people who are in complementary but not exactly what you're doing. So on my mutual board of directors, there's an attorney, there's a labor person, there's a coach. So a number of people from different fields, and you all get together with a single intent that you're going to hold each other accountable for what you want to achieve personally and professionally. And you get together, maybe depending on what your style is, either on Skype or in person, once a year, maybe twice a year, where you each do a report out as if you were reporting to the board. Here's what my goals and objectives are, and here's what I'm accomplishing, and here are my challenges. How can you help me? It's an amazing practice to really focus on where you are on your pathway. And you might start at this conference finding all kind of cool people. Clearly, we got a lot at stake, so we hope you get into lots of good collaborative leadership scenarios. Our next step here, hope you can read it in this light, is we have a question for you to think about. So as I'm turning the mic back over to Otto, we're going to both ask you for a second to think about what do you think we, big we, as big a we as you can imagine, individually and collectively need to pay attention to for building collective capacity to act.
Alan Ruttenberg, Creative Commons. Talking about open mind and empathy. And I know the place that I'm stuck on is, you know, it's easier to open my mind than to open someone else's mind. And so the question is, you know, how one interacts with someone who doesn't seem to have an open enough mind. That's where I spend my time thinking.
I guess to go off that, and then what you said earlier about setting up values and agreements at the beginning to really create a safe meeting space for collective capacity, and having then a lot of the groups that I've been working on, we then do workshops on different forms of oppression, whether it's around race or gender and all different types of privilege. And for each meeting we keep 10 to 15 minutes at the end to reflect on how we did on our values, and in a very compassionate and loving way to kind of, if we felt that someone violated those, to kind of express our feelings about that. Never in a shaming way is very important, but that's been incredibly helpful in continuing action as a group.
Yeah, hi, I'm Donnie from the Post-Growth Institute. I've got perhaps a different angle about what to pay attention on. It starts with individual assets, and it comes to that question of vision and those sorts of things first, because I pulled together a team 2 years ago of 8 people working virtually, and we were looking at economic futures, and instead of the typical approach, which might be to work out what's your vision, what kind of things are you looking to focus on. We just spent 3 months not touching any of those issues, just mapping our individual assets. And what that led to in terms of trust skyrocketing through the roof was actually a very different method of collaboration. We've just had an article in Fast Company about it, where our meetings are held only in silence. They're typed on Skype, and the power dynamics flattened straight away. There just wasn't any of the same kind of typical dynamics. And so my point there is about paying attention to the individual humanity at the beginning and that exploration of the gift economy within any collaborative group as a way to build trust and then form collaborative processes as a result.
I want to thank you both for the presentation. I'm definitely on the list to get the slides. They're great. 2 additions that come from my practice of for 15 years now doing facilitation and mediation that's generally trying to connect movements. And one is that I like the ground rule of assume good intent, that when you get people who come into a room who are value-based, mission-driven, we take our work seriously. And sometimes there's a sense of competition rather than collaboration around the outcome. So I like the idea of assuming good intent. And then similar to your yoga components, because I'm also a yoga teacher, I also like to tell people in those kinds of sort of catalytic collective action conversations that it's important to have a beginner's mind. That there's often this sort of intellectual proprietariness that comes in from different, whether they're different sectors or different movements. So the idea of flattening that landscape a little bit so that everyone behaves in a slightly different way, approaches the problem solving in a different way. Those are just two ground rules I found that are really helpful.
Eric Harris Brown, when I was thinking about what I need to pay attention to, it was again the comment of taking care of yourself. And you gave us half the room that was part of taking care of yourself and the other half that wasn't. And for me, one of the interesting things is that I know I'm in the half that wasn't. I know I should do that. So I have a concept, I have knowledge that I should do that. But that doesn't yield action for me individually. And so I know that whatever it is that would yield action for me as an individual to achieve that is the same thing that we need to do at the collective level, which I think has to do with how we embody action, because actually concepts come out of action, not concepts leading to action. But I don't know how to put that into the thing that we need at the social level exactly.
That is so beautiful. That is actually, I'll do my closing comments first, because that is the question I wake up with every morning, because I can give you both personal stories as well as data on awareness, knowledge, even motivation is necessary but not sufficient. And so we as change agents, how do we, so in terms of the rest of the conference, if people have any ideas on that, please get in touch with me, because that's what I wake up really thinking about every day. And in my closing remarks, I just want to say what an honor and pleasure it is to be in a room with all of you, both here and across the conference. As I was listening to the comments, I was just imagining what an amazing, powerful thing we could do if we could only somehow collaborate on the practices that we're all doing. I was just like, wow, what a gift that would be for others, and then create some kind of space where other people could add into that. So just good speed with all of your work. Thank you.
Well, that's a great idea. That could be actually one way to evolve the conference in the future. So closing remark from me, my experience has been, so what is it that actually works best for opening the mind, the heart, the will? It's not workshops. It is, and it's not talking, but it is total immersion journeys into the edges of the system in diverse groups, whom you prepare for that, move into that, and kind of reflect on the experience from all the different lenses that the different stakeholders bring. That is a very natural way. It's not painful. It doesn't take forever. And it naturally opens up a whole other dimension of connectedness and creativity to generate ideas. Because what you really see is not just the system, but you see yourself and your own kind of stuckness. So I think today in the world, there's no shortage in sense making. What's missing in society is co-sensing. So we all make sense in individual silos and kind of talk at the level of conclusions. And what's, what we maybe had a little bit here, but what is really missing are infrastructures for sensing, experiencing the systemic realities together and then make sense of them together. And the moment you do that, it actually creates like a different field of connections and a different field of creativity that you can access as a group and as a team and as a system. I have seen that many times, and it sounds so easy, and it's exactly what... What's that?
Would you call that community?
Yeah, it's kind of it's a sensing and creation community. So it's not a community based on shared values. I think values are overrated. You have people with same values that behave terribly, and you have systems that have completely different values and that can co-create in transformative ways. That's the interesting data that we need more of.
And we are, so we must have created something in this room because they're all wanting us out there. But please, before you leave, be sure to give someone that you connected with a good hug, okay? And we'll see you in the next room.